Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Easy Ag, the #1 podcast to help you farm differently. This morning, I want to visit with you about spider mites, corn rootworm beetles, and western bean cutworm. Because in the next few weeks, as this corn is tasseling, we're going to make the final management decisions we have to protect the yield that we established this spring at the planter. The spider mites are being seen in the edges of a few of these fields already, and although we haven't seen levels up above the threshold in very many locations, it's something that we really need to think about and consider before we fly that plane over the field. Anytime we're making a special application at tassel here, I feel like it's in our best interest to do a hard evaluation of the field and make sure we're putting all of the stuff in the tank the first time we're going over it, so that we don't have to spend an extra $6 on that application a second time. The other reason that we need to look at the mites before we make any final management decisions is because some of the insecticides that we might use to control corn rootworm beetle or western bean cutworm can have an impact on beneficial insects that fight off the spider mites naturally. And typically what can happen if you apply that insecticide, you might knock down the mite population along with the beneficial population, but the mites will flare up faster than the beneficials will come back. And so we need to be cognizant of, do we have any mites in the field? Do we need to be managing that mite population with a miticide or insecticide? Or if the field is clean, what's the risk of flaring those spider mites in the future? Second thing we're going to talk about, corn rootworm beetle. We need to get out there and scout those fields, especially that we are planning to go back to corn in next year. So the corn rootworm beetle is going to lay those eggs at the base of the corn plant, and then those eggs are going to potentially impact the root system on next year's corn, which is the critical part in the early stages of the corn growth, is to get that biggest root system we can. And so we want to check on that. And timing for that application would be shortly after tassel, typically, when we've got all those beetles pretty much present in the field because they're attracted to the silks and the tassels when that corn is growing. The second thing that we need to make sure we pay attention to is how many rootworm beetles do we have in the field when our corn is silking. If we have an excessive amount of rootworm beetles in the field, those beetles will eat those silks off. If they eat those silks off within a half of an inch of where the silks are getting out of the husk, we're going to have a hard time pollinating that corn, and that's going to impact our final yield this year. The third insect I want to talk to you about today is the western bean cutworm. We're starting to see a lot of western bean cutworm egg masses, and we've got some other information in today's email for you about western bean cutworm and options and control, things you need to be aware of. What I will tell you or show you here is right here on this leaf, we've got a western bean cutworm egg mass that's probably a few days old. You see how it's kind of turning brownish or gray. When you're scouting for these, you need to be scouting on the upper side of the leaves because the moths will hide themselves down in this, the whorl of this corn plant, and lay their eggs on the upper side of those leaves before they unfurl. And so you can see in this plant, there's a freshly laid egg mass. It's really nice and white. And kind of the stages that these egg masses go through, they start out really white when they're freshly laid. Then they'll turn kind of a brownish or grayish tint as they're maturing. Over a 5 to 7 day period, they'll go from that white, brownish gray, gray, purple, and then they'll go ahead and hatch. And what you end up with when you hatch is a little tiny worm about 1/8 to 1/4 inch in length. They first eat their eggs as their energy source. Then they may do some feeding on some leaf tissue as they migrate up the stalk to the tassel, where they feed on the tassel and the pollen. Once the corn is tasseling and pollinating, we're going to have silk emergence on that ear, and that's going to attract those worms down to the ear. So timing for control on western bean cutworm is typically once the field starts tasseling. If you have a high enough population out there which would be approximately 6 to 8 egg masses per 100 plants. And so you need to scout maybe 20 plants in multiple locations in your field to figure out what percentage of infestation you have. If you scout 20 plants and you've got more than 2 egg masses, you're going to be in excess of 10% infestation. And so if you're in excess in that location, scout a few other locations in the field, come to your average. And if your average is above 6 or 8%, we need to look at controlling the Western Bean Cutworm. Other than insecticide, Agrisure Vitara is an excellent way of controlling the Western Bean Cutworm. It is the only trait left on the market that I'm aware of that claims nearly 100% control of the insect. Agrisure Vitara is different than the other BT traits on the market because it's expressed in every part of the plant. So it's expressed in the root, in the stalk, in the leaf, in the tassel, in the pollen, in the silk, in the husk, and in the kernel. And so there's very limited chance that the cutworm would ever get into the ear, because it's more than likely going to feed on something on that plant before it bores into the side of that ear. And so if you have a corn from Golden Harvest with a 5222, a 3220, or a 3111 trait stack, you have Agrisure Vitara in your field. The 3220 and the 5222 are 5% refuge in a bag. So if we do see excessive levels of infestation in those fields, we need to probably look at controlling those via insecticide. But if you're out scouting and you know you're in a Vitara field, call me if you think your levels are that high. I'll come out, we'll do a really thorough investigation before we make that decision, because it's very good at controlling them. I think those are the main things for today. The timing on these applications can be a little bit different, but if we're flying that airplane across the field, we want to try and put as much stuff in it as we can if we think that the conditions warrant spraying. So we may be able to knock down the Western Bean Cutworm, the Corn Root Worm, and the spider mites all in one application if we think the timing is right and there's going to be a need for all of them. Otherwise, we may have to do multiple applications. That's all for today. I'm Matt Long, helping you farm differently, providing information you can't get anywhere else.